I grew up in a middle-class family, but I became working class when I was 16 working in McDonald's.
I mean, how many shifts in McDonald's do you have to do before you cease to be middle class and actually become working class? The leader of the opposition thinks that if you do a couple of shifts in McDonald's, then you can become working class.
The British Prime Minister, the Labour Prime Minister, made a joke about how I worked at McDonald's. He would never have dared to do that if I was a left-wing activist. And if a Conservative Prime Minister had made those comments about a black party leader, they would have been called a racist and asked to resign.
This week, Kemi Badenoch was ridiculed for saying that she was working class when she worked in McDonald's. In this video, we're going to break down why and or if this matters and how we should think about concepts like this for our leaders. Now, you may think that this subject matter is a simple one, but I guarantee you it's deeper than you think. Stay tuned. For those of you that don't know, my name is TJ. I'm mixed Nigerian and British, and I took it upon myself to leave the UK and move to Uganda to start a new life with my partner, Medina. However, this journey has forced me to take stock of all sorts of political situations. So when our politicians speak, I try to approach the situation in good faith. I don't just want to focus on what they say, but what are they intending with what they say. I'm particularly wary about this because I believe media nowadays is not reporting honestly. They only want to report based off their talking points, their point of view, their narrative, or whatever political affiliations they have. So when I saw Kemi getting roasted, I want to know exactly the full context.
It was the first time that I interacted properly with people who didn't come from the sort of background that I came from. I grew up in a middle-class family, but I became working class when I was 16 working in McDonald's.
The leader of the opposition thinks that if you do a couple of shifts in McDonald's, then you can become working class. So by that logic, if I keep coming back here, I could be the next James Bond.
He's talking here at the film studio, and he made the connection between James Bond, the film studio, Kemi Badenoch, McDonald's. I don't think it works all that well, but it serves its purpose. Notice Kier's positioning of that statement.
A couple of shifts in McDonald's.
A couple of shifts. It's designed to downplay the idea that Kemi put in any real graft, right? We're already getting a subtle spin, subtle manipulation. He wants to implant in the minds of British people that she is not for you. She is for the elites. He wants to reinforce the idea that he is for the working class and he is for the greater good. He's got your best interests at heart. Now, I don't know about you, but whether it's Kemi Badenoch, Nigel Farage, or Kier Starmer, I get skeptical when politicians try to make the relatability angle. I want to know what your policies are and judge you by your actions, because those actions will determine whether you're for me or if you're after money or the interests of big corporations. So what did Kemi mean? Was she also making an attempt just to relate to people? Let's check it out.
What did you mean when you told me on my podcast that you became working class at McDonald's?
Well, I worked at McDonald's when I was 16, but it wasn't working at McDonald's that made me working class. It was an example of how I had become working class. I wasn't working there as a weekend job or part-time. That was my job. I was going to college part-time. I went to an FE college. And I had left Nigeria, where I'd had a middle-class life, driven to school every day. And the first time I ever went on a bus was in this country.
In Nigeria, it's common for middle-class people to have a driver, to have someone, what may be called a maid, what you would call an au pair in the United Kingdom. You could say that this is somewhat a life of privilege. You were still going to have to deal with power outages every day. You were still going to have to deal with things like inflation, with the military leadership, and understand a little bit about struggling in life.
The first time I ever went on a bus was in this country. But I couldn't even afford bus money most of the time. I had to walk everywhere. Sometimes I was hungry. I was on my own. I had a place to live, but I had to do everything myself at a very young age. If that is not working class, I don't know what working class is.
That is not what people are taking umbrage about, right? People are taking umbrage about the social side of being working class. And Kemi's actually come across this kind of issue before. Although she's black, many black people don't feel she's culturally black. So this is grounds to reject her as a black figure, as a person for black people or for Nigerians.
If that is not working class, I don't know what working class is. The working classes are the people who have to work for a living. Otherwise, they will be in trouble. They are people who don't necessarily have big savings or a family that can look after them.
Even if you reject the idea that she's working class and you believe that that matters, may I just compare her to Boris Johnson, who went to Eton, to David Cameron, who went to Eton. This Kemi Badenoch is not the same animal as that. Tell me the time when any of those previous leaders would have had to budget and look for bus fare and look for rent and actually put on the aprons and work in McDonald's. There should be an acknowledgement that that experience could very well be a humbling experience. When you've been driven to school, when you've had privileges and you drop down financially to a place where you're struggling for money. So after Kier Starmer came with that joke and various people in the media had absolute joy and glee at the concept that Kemi was so detached from reality based off that statement, she came back and she had a speech.
I was lucky in my experiences. I was born to a relatively wealthy family and had a decent education. But I also know what it is like to be poor.
This is a public acknowledgement of her privilege and also an acknowledgement of the fact that she became poor. Again, this speaks to life experience.
I watched my family become poor as their wealth, income, and savings were inflated away by destructive government policies.
She's not talking about becoming poor in the UK. No, she's talking about becoming poor in Africa, where there is no welfare system, where if things go wrong, you are really on your own. My family experienced this, and I've said in previous videos, I've sat down with my mum who's talked about hyperinflation. And I don't know about you, but I would prefer a politician that has actually been through something.
Family become poor as their wealth, income, and savings were inflated away by destructive government policies. But they didn't call it socialism, but it definitely was. Capital controls, no freedom of movement, government owning the means of production. And there was no freedom either. The government decided which school your child went to, it decided which businesses could or could not operate, all the way to arrests with no trial and state-sanctioned murder. So I know what freedom looks like. It's what I had in the UK. I know the values that can make citizens wealthier and happier. Classic liberal values. Not left-wing liberalism, but classic liberalism of free markets, free speech, free enterprise, freedom of religion, the presumption of innocence and trusted institutions within the rule of law, and equality under the law, no matter who you are or where you come from. All of those things were missing when I was growing up as a child. So I know their value, and I know that in the West, we may be losing what made our countries great.
This mudslinging of, oh, you're working class because you worked in McDonald's, should not be at the forefront of your mind at this point.
All of us here are custodians of a great tradition, a tradition that is under threat. We all have something in common, whether you identify as a conservative or as a classic liberal. All of us on the center-right share these values, and we are dealing with the same problem. And that is that those values have been hacked, they have been undermined. But if we can spot the trick, we can stop it from destroying our societies. We are giving away freedoms away by stealth because we don't know that value, and we are not adapting. Ideologies and beliefs that demand our tolerance, even as they seek to undermine the very culture and institutions that create that tolerance. It is the question all of us in politics today must answer. How do liberal democracies, which are so tolerant and so accepting, fight against the intolerance of those it has accepted, of different norms, customs, and values which are accommodated within the liberal framework, but which seek to undermine it at every level?
She came to the UK after being in a place that had a lot of difficulties, and she enjoyed the freedoms that she found. And she came as a foreigner and adapted to those freedoms, to those cultures, to those norms. What we're seeing now is that people are coming in and they are not respecting those freedoms. Instead, they're trying to import the stuff from those countries in. All the criticism she gets. Tell me what's wrong with wanting people to preserve the culture that she thinks has made her life better from the culture she came from.
I started my speech by explaining that I joined the conservative movement in an unusual way. It started when I moved back to the UK from Nigeria, age 16. My parents were doctors. They wanted me to be doctors just like them. So I got to London and got a job at McDonald's.
And then I started off part-time at a local college where I told them what my ambitions were. And it was the first time in my entire life that a teacher told me, a straight-A student, that my ambitions were too high. She asked me if I was sure I wanted to be a doctor. It would be much easier if I became a nurse. And I realized now that she was trying to be helpful in her own misguided way. She thought that Black kids were not very academic. She wanted me to aim low and succeed rather than aim high and fail.
This is another very important point. Just because you recognize that where you come to has a better system or a better situation where you've come from, that doesn't mean you're going to encounter things that aren't negative where you come to. No country is perfect. One of the things in the 80s and 90s in the UK, as a Black person, you're going to encounter is racism and ignorance. I encountered it. My family encountered it. There's nothing wrong in saying, hey, you've got all these things right in your country. This is a great country. You've got a lot of things going for you, but you have this thing wrong. I'm not talking about whining and complaining about it. I'm talking about taking action, which is what her life represents. Despite being told all of this stuff, she jogged that idea on and she said, no, you think I'm dumb because I'm Black, but I'm going to show you. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to push forward and I'm going to show you that I can become something of importance.
And you all know that if a teacher tells a 16-year-old their grades aren't that important, they won't work as hard. I didn't know how to describe what was happening at the time, but I knew I didn't like it. Today, I call it the bigotry of low expectations. It does not believe in meritocracy, and it seeded in me a hatred of affirmative action policies that are designed in theory to help minorities, but in reality hold them back and cast doubt on their real achievements. The truth is that the left are not that interested in ethnic minorities, except as a tool to fight their battles against the right. In fact, just this morning, the British Prime Minister, the Labour Prime Minister, made a joke about how I worked at McDonald's. He would never have dared to do that if I was a left-wing activist. And if a Conservative Prime Minister had made those comments about a Black party leader, they would have been called a racist and asked to resign.
I'm not sure that's entirely true, but it rings true. And what it actually speaks to me, again, is the mudslinging. They don't care about what she's got to say. All of this speech, they don't care about any of that. What they care about is some gaffe or some misinterpretation or some imprecise definition of working class versus not working class. But when you look at it, she's battled against prejudice. She's battled against those that told her she can't achieve, she shouldn't achieve, she should just be a nurse. And she's risen to a position of prominence. What's not to respect?
Even as a teenager, I could see the hypocrisy in so much of their rhetoric. I knew that these were not my kind of people. And so I started taking an interest in conservatism and happened upon the books of Thomas Sowell. And the rest, as they say, is history.
So let's look at the definition of working class.
No, I was born in the same area that I live in now. I've still got the same friends that I've had then. I'm never leaving that area because that's where my background and my history is. I love where I live, and just because I'm an actress or presenter doesn't mean I've changed I'm always going to be working class, no matter what you say. And I love being working class as well.
But would you...
My first job was in a fish and chip shop.
Well, I'm gonna talk about what determines your class, like with the official determination.
Yes, I'm interested in the official determination.
Because I would argue that you have working class roots. I wouldn't necessarily say that you're working class now, but you have working class roots.
You're
and
wrong,
that
you're
never,
wrong.
That never leaves
I'm
you.
always going to be working class. I don't care what you say.
So... Spicy, Linda. So working class is used to describe people in a social class marked by jobs that provide low pay, require limited skill or physical labour. Typically, working class jobs have reduced education requirement. Unemployed people of those supported by a social welfare programme are often included in the working class. However, working class can also be defined by your culture, a close-knit community lifestyle, looking out for each other and protecting one another, etc., etc.
That's me.
So there's this idea that virtue is derived from being culturally working class. We think the people that have grown up with a silver spoon in their mouth are privileged and they had life handed to them and they don't know the struggles that we went through. So there's this idea that you can't be virtuous and rich. I think society reads a little bit too much into this. I'm sure many people are familiar with George Orwell, 1984. Well, he also wrote a book called The Road to Wigan Pier, which is a great book. I listened to the audiobook a few years ago. What happens is George Orwell, who's supposed to be middle class, upper class, decides to go and live in Wigan with coal miners. And really, in this book, he's trying to define the British class system, what it means to be working class, what it means to be middle class, and what it means to be upper class. The part I want to focus on is that he more or less concludes that rich upper class people, even if they drop all the way down to the bottom of the rung socially and economically, still consider themselves as upper class. And the fact that it's not actually connected to your finances is further underlined when you think about things like the term new money. There's an idea that the real elites, the real rich, the real wealthy, even if you make money, will not consider you one of them. They'll consider you new money. And of course, vice versa.
I wouldn't necessarily say that you're working class now, but you have working class roots.
You're
and
wrong,
that never,
you're wrong.
That never leaves
I'm
you.
always going to be working class. I don't care what you say.
So when you think about what Kemi Badenoch said, which is something you may very well disagree with, I'm saying to you, well, actually look at her life and make a determination. For me, I like people who are not victims. I like people that have actually had life experience, not just being handed everything and given everything. Most people are going to make surface level judgments in general. They're going to make judgments based off headlines. They're going to make judgments based off the influence of the media that they choose to follow. They're going to make judgments based off the hearsay of their friends. I think that's lazy, and I think that doesn't help anybody. And I think that actually may put you in a situation one day where you dismiss someone that could actually have good things for you. If you're still watching this video at this point, would it be too much effort for you to write in the comment section the words, "look deeper"? That way I know that you're rocking with me and that I've got the support to keep going. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you in the next video.
Thank you.